On this segment of the program, Moscow is insisting that NATO halt its eastward expansion. That's according to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He says the Kremlin will soon put forward proposals for a new European security pact that would hopefully stop the Western military alliance from expanding further east. Meantime, Moscow has also said that Ukraine's stated goal of retaking the Crimea region, which rejoined Russia in 2014, amounts to a direct threat to Russia. The Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov dismissed Ukraine's rhetoric as aggressive, warning that provocative moves are increasing on the line of contact in East Ukraine. NATO has been accusing Russia of escalating the situation and preparing to launch an attack on Ukraine, a NATO ally, but not a member. The Kremlin rules out any plans for a military incursion into Ukraine and has instead complained about NATO deploying military hardware on Russian borders. Well, joining us on this segment of the News Review, we have journalist and political commentator Fred Weir, who's joining us from Moscow. Also, we have John Bosnitch, journalist and political consultant, who's with us from Basel. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with Mr. Weir. Let's get your perspective on the overall tensions right now. Moscow is insisting that NATO must halt its eastward expansion. That's the words according to the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. At what point are the tensions right now?
Well, I think they're close to a boiling point. The two foreign ministers are meeting in Stockholm today. I mean, Lavrov and Antony Blinken. And they'll probably bring diametrically opposed messages to one another. But on the ground, I mean, I'm no military expert. I don't know what the truth is, but it does seem that the Russians made some troop movements within their Western military district, which triggered alarms. And the Western military district does border on Ukraine, but it also contains cities like Smolensk and Moscow. On any given day over the past 20 years, there have been probably 100,000 soldiers stationed permanently in this area, and therefore there's some other reason that somebody has triggered an alarm about Russian invasion, and it's probably a political one. By the same token, the Russians are complaining that the Ukrainians have sent half their army into the Donbass. And if that's true, it may well herald Ukrainian military action against those two rebel republics. So there's something going on. There definitely is. The Russians want to have a conversation about NATO expansion, not just the big thing that's been going on for decades, but the creeping integration of Ukraine, its army and military hardware into the NATO system. This is what the Russians are really concerned about, not that Ukraine will get up and join NATO tomorrow, because it won't, but that, over the months and years of integrating, Ukrainian army will effectively become a NATO one. So that's what the Russians are concerned about. They want some sort of international treaty, something like the treaty around Austria in 1955, something more than the arrangement with Finland during the Cold War, something that will ensure that countries like Ukraine and Georgia will never join NATO. If the Western powers were prepared to negotiate something like that with the Russians, that would really take a lot of the pressure off. Because the Russians don't care whether Ukraine is a democracy, or whether it, has its relations with the West. They care about it becoming part of a hostile, what they see as a hostile military alliance.
Mr. Bosnitch, a message from Moscow to Kiev. The Kremlin has said Ukraine's stated goal of retaking Crimea amounts to a direct threat to Russia. It will obviously not accept that. What is Ukraine trying to achieve here?
Well, first of all, we've got to stop talking about Ukraine, because Ukraine doesn't exist as a state now. There's a rump Ukraine operated out of Kiev under the direct advice and control of the American military machine. There's a puppet regime based in Kiev, which does exactly and precisely whatever it's directed to do by Washington and by other NATO ally colonies, because these are military colonies. There is no need whatsoever for NATO to move to the east unless it wants to invade Russia, which is evidently their main goal, to destabilize and then to destroy Russia. NATO is already starting to do saber rattling with respect to China, as if they've already invaded and destroyed Russia. It doesn't take a PhD in political science to know this. And in fact, the average NATO military commander on the ground, if you or if I, as a journalist, interviewed him, would tell you and have told me on the record that there's nothing planned in that region except continued step-by-step aggression. And I'm very disappointed to say that Canada, my native home country, has been directly involved in training Ukrainian forces in the art of aggression against their own countrymen.
Mr. Weir, the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, in his comments said that the Kremlin will soon put forward proposals for a new European security pact that would hopefully stop NATO from expanding further east. Let's look at the possibilities here. First of all, we would have to see how Europe would stand with regards to this, and what options would Moscow have if such a proposal was put forth.
Well, they will put forward such a proposal. It's probably a couple of decades too late. In the late Soviet period, Gorbachev, the former Soviet president, was talking about this idea, a new security architecture for Europe. And there were discussions and there were promises that NATO wouldn't be expanded, that there would be something new. But of course, the Soviet Union collapsed and all that went out the window. And the United States and its allies decided to expand Western institutions, primarily the military alliance NATO, to the east. And this is the nub of a lot of the problems that we're facing now. And I think so the Russians will have some, I think, probably practical set of proposals that would ensure the sovereignty and independence of Ukraine and Georgia and those countries, while also being an international agreement that there will be no expansion of military alliances, probably on either side, so that they will remain neutral territory, like Finland during the Cold War or something like that, between the two. That's probably the essence of what the Russians will propose. It's probably the only way to take down the temperature, which is soaring right now, something like that. And my only concern is that in the West, certainly in Washington, nobody is ready for that conversation.
And Mr. Bosnitch, a final question here. NATO has been accusing Russia of escalating the situation, of being aggressive, when in fact we know it's NATO's eastward expansion. Aggressive, albeit, is what's actually rising the tensions here. Russia is moving its troops around in its sovereign territory, and it's getting censured by NATO. By the looks of it, United States' hypocrisy seems to be contagious to the alliances and groups that it's also a member of.
Well, we've got to stop calling those alliances. Those are colonial structures, colonial military structures run directly out of Washington via the name of NATO. I want to give you a parallel very briefly that tells you how serious this is. I grew up in Canada. Canada resembles Ukraine's relationship with Russia, a very similar people in Canada and America. What would happen in Washington? What would Washington say if Russian troops or Russian-backed forces in Quebec decided to separate and create their own country that was anti-American, or if the same thing happened with an English part of Canada and the people of Quebec resisted like the people of Donbass and said, we don't want to become a part of America. And then they started talking about bringing Russian weapons and troops and having Canada join the independent group of states. That's the parallel here. Right on America's borders, Russian missiles. That's what NATO is doing to Russia via Ukraine. And the relationship between the Ukrainian people and the Russian people is even tighter than the relationship between the Canadian people and the American people. This would never, ever happen. So they have to start treating others the way they wish to be treated themselves. And that comes from the Bible.
All right, thanks a lot, gentlemen. Fred Weir, journalist and political commentator, joining us from Moscow. And also thanks to journalist and political consultant John Bosnitch, speaking to us from Basel. And with that brings us to an end here on this edition of the News Review. But do stay tuned. There's plenty more to come here on Press TV. Stick around.